The story is told of the man who went to the coffee shop and saw his pastor, or his former pastor, since he was no longer going to church. And when the former pastor, came up to him and said, "Hey, how have you been? I haven't seen you for ages." He was happy to report to her, "I no longer go to church. The church is full of hypocrites, and I don't go to church anymore." And she looked at him with all the love of a mother that we hear of in today's second reading. And she said, "There's always room for one more hypocrite in the church on Sunday." Ouch! Sisters and brothers, siblings, in today's scriptures, we have some powerful lessons on hypocrites, on people who say one thing and do another. And in today's first reading, the prophet Malachi had some harsh words for the hypocrites of his day. And who was he condemning? The priests, yikes, of his day. In some harsh words. You preach certain things, and you don't even practice it. You're not a model for those who are following you. You hypocrites. Did you hear that in today's gospel as well? Jesus is speaking to the religious leaders of his day. They called them the scribes and the Pharisees. And 7 times in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 23, he says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you," what?
Hypocrites.
You hypocrites. Today's scriptures cause us to look at our lives and to ask ourselves, how are we judging others? Can we be a little judgy at times as well? How do we condemn others? Because after all, it's a very human tendency for us to look at the world, for us to look at other people, and for us to judge them. A very personal story. I remember when I was in the seminary, I was speaking with my spiritual director. And I told my spiritual director how it was that another seminarian was just driving me crazy. Have you had a person in your life who just drives you crazy? This other seminarian was driving me crazy. And so I told my spiritual director that. And my spiritual director said, "Have you ever noticed that you sometimes do that too?" Isn't that true, though? That sometimes it's easy for us to see things in other people, and not so easy for us to see that in ourselves. I've often said, you got to be careful when you point one finger to someone else. Why? Because there are 3 fingers pointing back at you. Right? It's easy for us to judge and condemn, but sometimes we find ourselves judging and condemning others who are simply doing what we as human beings sometimes do ourselves. Amen? You hypocrites. Recalling those first years after I was ordained, the Roman Catholic Church with its pointing fingers at certain sexual sins and or at the LGBTQIA plus community. And suddenly all of us, that was in the early 2000s, were saying, "You hypocrites." It's easy for us to judge and condemn others. Amen? It's very natural. But I suspect that in the end, we have to take a look at ourselves and ask ourselves, when we get all upset at that person who cut us off in traffic, oh, wait a minute. And we have to ask ourselves, have we ever done similar things? When we see that person speeding down the road, yikes, it's easy to judge others and not notice when it is we do those things ourselves. When that person was late, have you never been late before yourself? Right? When we criticize other people's choices, how they're eating, or various lifestyle choices, etc., maybe it's time for us to look in the mirror to look at that person in the mirror. Today's first reading and today's gospel give us various examples of what not to do. Not to be so judgy. Not to say one thing and do another. Not to tie up heavy burdens for other people. Not to seek places of honor. Not to be attached to titles. Today's second reading, though, gives us a list of what to do. Did you hear today's second reading? From the letter of Paul, Silvanus, and Timothy to the Thessalonians. When we were among you like a nursing mother with her child. That's the type of affection that we shared with you. When we're in those situations when we feel all judgy, imagine pausing for a moment and showing that person a little love and patience. Amen. Because this week, as we celebrate All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, we don't remember those people who've gone before us because they were judgy little hypocrites. We remember them for their love, for their care, for all those virtues and patience that they displayed in their lives. Have you heard the name Stephen Covey? He wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Stephen Covey? In his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, habit number 2, if I'm not mistaken, is where he asks you to imagine one day lying in your casket. Yeah, I guess that's a little morbid. But Stephen Covey says, imagine one day, you're lying in your casket. What do you want those people around you to be saying? Will they be saying, he was such a judgy hypocrite? She was this or that? Or will they be referring to your love and care and all those other qualities that you sought to live in your life? Sisters and brothers, this is a good weekend for us to pause and to remember those who've gone before us, but also to pause and to ask ourselves how it is that we, too, will be remembered. Let's think about that. And let's live this week not as so many other hypocrites in this world, pointing fingers at and judging others, but instead looking at ourselves in the mirror and figuring out how it is that we're going to live so as to be loved and esteemed like all those who've gone before us.